What would you do if you were kicked out of a luxury dealership just for looking like you didn't belong, only to return the next day owning the place? This isn't just about revenge, it's about rewriting the rules. Ready to be inspired? Because Chanel Matthews changed everything. The sun was barely up when Chanel Matthews pulled into the dealership lot, parking her modest hybrid between a pair of luxury SUVs. The sharp lines of German engineering glinted all around her. But Chanel wasn't intimidated. She'd done her research. She wasn't here to browse. She came with purpose. Clutching a small leather portfolio under one arm and tucking her keys into her bag, she stepped out with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth, even if the world often didn't. Her outfit was simple: clean jeans, white tee, and sneakers. Her afro puff bounced gently as she walked, and the only jewelry she wore was her wedding band. Inside, polished floors reflected gleaming Bentleys and Aston Martins. Salesmen in tailored blazers hovered like hawks, ready to pounce on someone else. Chanel walked past the glass doors and paused. No one greeted her. No one even made eye contact. Across the room, a young white couple had just walked in and were instantly met with smiles and champagne flutes. Chanel stood there, invisible. She cleared her throat and approached the reception desk. "Hi, I'm interested in the new Vantage model. I'd like to speak with someone about a test drive." The receptionist didn't even look up from her screen. "We don't typically do walk-ins. Do you have an appointment?" Her tone dripped with suspicion. "No, but You might want to check the pre-owned lot down the street," a salesman interrupted, sliding behind her with a smirk. "We don't let just anyone take these out. Our clients are serious buyers." Chanel blinked. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard him, but the smirk on his face told her otherwise. She took a deep breath. She had options, more than they knew. But at that moment, she didn't feel like a successful investor or a woman married to one of the most powerful men in the city. She felt small, disrespected, but not broken. She turned slowly and walked toward the glass exit, her portfolio still clutched tight. The sun was higher now, shining off the hood of a silver Rolls-Royce parked across the street. Chanel smiled faintly. They had no idea who they'd just dismissed, but they were about to find out. Chanel lingered in the showroom, refusing to be rushed. She'd waited weeks to carve out time for this visit, researching models, comparing specs, narrowing her list. She wasn't some clueless browser. She was an investor, a strategist, a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. But the showroom didn't seem to care. From behind a glass desk, a middle-aged salesman in a navy jacket looked straight at her, and then looked through her, as if she were just another background shadow against the chrome and marble. He adjusted his cufflinks, then turned with practiced ease toward a man in loafers who'd just walked in, flashing him a grin and reaching out with both hands like a long-lost cousin. Chanel waited. She watched. 3 different salesmen approached other customers, each one white, dressed in upscale casual. Each greeted with smiles, handshakes, sparkling water. One woman even got a guided tour of a Bentley's interior. The salesman crouched respectfully at her side, explaining every detail with the care of a museum curator. But Chanel, not a single hello. She stepped toward a glistening Aston Martin, letting her fingers trace the curve of its side panel. Still nothing. When she finally locked eyes with a passing employee, she gave a polite nod. He offered a nod back, but kept walking. Invisible. Again. Minutes passed. Chanel walked to the front desk, where a young woman with stiff posture glanced up, then quickly back at her screen. Chanel spoke anyway. "Hi, I'm looking to speak with someone about the Vantage model. I'd like to explore a custom build, possibly even—" "Do you have an appointment?" the receptionist interrupted, without even looking at her. "No, but I was hoping—" Before she could finish, a different voice chimed in. "Ma'am," said the salesman from earlier, strolling over with forced patience, "we usually don't do test drives unless someone's been pre-qualified. It saves everyone time." Chanel's eyebrows lifted. "Excuse me? It's just, these cars are a bit out of reach for some people. You understand." He smiled like he was doing her a favor. "There's a more affordable dealership not far from here." Chanel felt heat rising in her chest, but her expression didn't flicker. She looked him dead in the eye, steady and calm, and said just 4 words. "You've made a mistake." Chanel stood frozen for a moment, her words, "You've made a mistake," hanging in the air like smoke from a slow-burning fire. The salesman's smirk faltered slightly, but arrogance is a stubborn thing. He crossed his arms, glancing sideways at the receptionist, who raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Is she serious?" Chanel straightened her back. "I'd like to speak with a manager," she said clearly, her voice calm but firm. That apparently was the last straw. "Security," the salesman called over his shoulder with a dry chuckle. "We have a situation here." A situation? Chanel blinked in disbelief. Around her, heads turned. Customers, employees, even the woman sipping sparkling water by the Bentley. It was like a movie scene, only she wasn't acting, and she wasn't going to cry. Within moments, a uniformed security guard approached. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Chanel stared at him. "For asking to speak to a manager?" "I'm just following protocol, ma'am," he muttered, not meeting her eyes. "This is a private business. Management reserves the right—" "To profile black women in jeans?" she asked, her tone sharp now. "Because that's exactly what this is." The guard looked uncomfortable, but the salesman stepped in again, this time louder, for the audience, not her. "We've had issues before with people wandering in, pretending to be buyers," he said, hands on hips. "This isn't a gallery. These are high-value vehicles." The implication was clear. "You don't belong here." Chanel's throat tightened, but her face remained still, unreadable. She'd faced worse. She knew how quickly confidence could be mistaken for threat when it came wrapped in black skin. She could hear a couple murmuring behind her, feel the sting of eyes judging, assuming, dismissing. Still, she nodded slowly and turned to leave, but not before she said, with quiet precision, "You don't know who I am, but tomorrow you will." And with that, she walked out, shoulders squared, head high. The doors closed behind her, but the moment didn't end. Inside, they chuckled and went back to business. Outside, Chanel Matthews pulled out her phone. Not to record, not to post. She dialed one number, her husband's, and when he picked up, all she said was, "They played themselves." They saw a black woman in sneakers and jeans. What they didn't see was the empire she quietly helped build. By the time Chanel Matthews slid back into her hybrid and shut the door, her breathing had steadied, but her mind was sharp, ticking like a metronome. She looked down at her phone. Missed texts, a meeting reminder, an email from a venture capital firm asking for her input. They didn't know who she was, but they were about to. Dr. Chanel Matthews wasn't just anybody. She held a PhD in behavioral economics, had been featured in Forbes for her work in inclusive investing, and sat on the board of a women-led tech accelerator that had launched 3 unicorn startups in the past 2 years. She had mentored founders, managed portfolios, and guest lectured at Harvard, all without ever needing to name drop. But the most powerful thing about Chanel, she didn't wear her success. She didn't need to. Her style was simple, intentional. She believed true wealth wasn't in labels, it was in freedom, and hers had been hard-earned. From a single-parent home in Atlanta to Ivy League halls, she'd risen without shortcuts. Her husband, David Matthews, respected her for that, loved her for that. And when they met at a pitch event 5 years ago, he didn't fall for her resume. He fell for her fire. David Matthews was a billionaire tech mogul with a sharp mind and a sharper instinct for people. When Chanel told him she'd been thrown out of a dealership for not looking the part, his voice went cold on the other end of the line. "What's the name of the place?" he asked. She told him. There was a long pause. "Good on," he said. "I've been looking for an excuse to deal with them." Chanel didn't ask what he meant. She just leaned back in her seat, eyes locked on the dealership across the street. They thought they'd embarrassed her. What they'd really done was wake up a storm. Inside that dealership, the salesman laughed over lattes, thinking it was just another Tuesday. They didn't realize that by 10 a.m. the next day, a Rolls-Royce Phantom would pull up to their front door. Not to buy a car, but to deliver a lesson in legacy. And this time, they'd be the ones standing outside. Chanel sat in her car, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the building that had just tried to shrink her. She wasn't angry anymore. She was focused. A slow breath escaped her lips as she reached for her phone. No social media rant, no viral video. She wasn't looking for internet sympathy. She was looking for accountability, and she had a direct line to it. She tapped David Matthews in her favorites. 1 ring. 2. "Hey, love," his voice came in, warm and calm, but with that razor-sharp undertone he reserved for when things didn't sit right. Chanel didn't waste time. "I went to Pinnacle Motors today, the Aston Martin dealership on Fairview." "Okay," he said slowly. "And?" "They refused to help me, laughed, called security, had me escorted out." Silence. Not the kind that meant confusion, the kind that meant calculation. "What did you wear?" he asked. "Jeans, sneakers, natural hair out." Another pause. "Same Chanel who just helped a fintech startup secure $20 million in pre-seed funding last week?" "The very one," she said dryly. He gave a low chuckle, not amused but dangerous. "Say no more." That's all he said. That's all he needed to say. Because David wasn't just Chanel's husband. He was a man with quiet power. Not the flashy kind that shouts in private jets and watches. The kind that acquires companies with a phone call and turns boardrooms silent when he walks in. He made his fortune designing AI for financial systems. Tech so valuable that global banks still pay licensing fees to use his earliest patents. He didn't post about his wealth. He moved it. And when someone disrespected Chanel, he moved quickly. After that call, Chanel didn't drive home. She parked at her favorite cafe, ordered a lavender tea, and opened her laptop. By the time the steam rose from her cup, she was already drafting notes for the week's strategy call, because she didn't need revenge to feel powerful. She was power, but across town, David was already in motion. Quiet phone calls to quiet men. A deal pulled off the back burner. A forgotten proposal reactivated. Names, numbers, and contracts exchanged before sunset. The sales team at Pinnacle Motors had no idea what had just been set in motion. They thought they'd dismissed a nobody, but all they'd done was pull the wrong thread, and the whole curtain was about to fall. The next morning, the sky over Fairview Avenue was clear, eerily calm, as if the city itself was holding its breath. At 9:03 a.m., the glass doors of Pinnacle Motors slid open like any other day. The receptionist straightened her blazer. Salesman joked near the espresso machine. The same salesman who had dismissed Chanel the day before leaned casually on a gleaming Bentley, sipping a latte like the king of the showroom. Then it happened. A Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled onto the lot. Jet black, custom rims, a license plate that read simply, M-Legacy. It moved like a ghost ship, silent, smooth, commanding. Everyone turned. The car rolled to a slow stop directly in front of the dealership doors. No one got out, not right away. Just the sight of it sent a ripple of confusion through the staff. The salesman squinted. "Who's that?" "New money, probably." But his voice lacked its usual swagger. The doors of the Rolls opened, first the back, then the front. Out stepped 2 men in sharp suits, both with the poise of seasoned attorneys. Then from the passenger seat, Chanel emerged. This time she wasn't in jeans. She wore a power suit the color of storm clouds, tailored to perfection, heels clicking like punctuation marks against the pavement. Her hair was slicked back into a braided bun, her face calm, but her eyes, fire. Behind her, David Matthews finally stepped out. Tall, crisp, silent. The kind of presence that didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. The salesman's mouth opened slightly. He recognized David. Everyone in the tech world did, but it didn't click right away. "Mr. Matthews?" The general manager rushed forward, suddenly breathless. Can we help you?" David looked him over slowly, then nodded toward Chanel. "She'll tell you why we're here." Chanel stepped forward, her voice smooth as silk, sharp as glass. "I came here yesterday to test drive a car," she said. "I was profiled, insulted, and removed like I was a problem. But I wasn't the problem." She turned slightly toward David. "You were. The manager's face fell. The salesman's coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered. And just like that, the luxury dealership wasn't in the driver's seat anymore. The shattered coffee cup on the tile floor wasn't the loudest thing in the room. It was the silence that followed. Every employee at Pinnacle Motors stood still, as if frozen in a museum display. All eyes were on Chanel, and she didn't flinch. The manager stammered. "Mrs. Matthews, we sincerely apologize for—" She raised a hand. "I'm not here for an apology," she said. "I'm here to inform you of a transition." He blinked. "A transition?" David stepped forward then, phone in hand, scrolling casually through an email. "As of this morning," he said evenly, "my firm finalized acquisition of a controlling interest in the holding company that owns this dealership." A beat, then another. The manager's face went pale. "Wait, what?" David looked up. "It's a small piece of a larger portfolio. We were in talks for months, but after what happened yesterday," he nodded toward Chanel, "I pushed it through in 12 hours. The receptionist gasped. The same salesman who had ignored Chanel now stood stiff as statues. "That smug one, the one who called security?" He backed away like the walls were shrinking. "You didn't just disrespect my wife," David continued. "You disrespected a legacy, and that has consequences." Chanel smiled softly, her voice calm but electric. "This location will be undergoing some restructuring, effective immediately." She turned to the salesman who had humiliated her. "You told me I didn't belong, that I should try a more affordable dealership." He wouldn't meet her gaze. "Well," she said, eyes locked on his, "I bought this one instead." The silence cracked, snapped like a brittle branch under pressure. Then Chanel walked past him, heels echoing across the floor. She stopped at the very car she'd admired yesterday, the Aston Martin Vantage, and ran her hand across its hood again. "Go ahead," David said behind her. "Pick whatever you want. Or better yet, let's have it delivered." Cameras from employees' phones were already out, not for TikTok clout, but to capture what power in real time looked like. Chanel turned back to the stunned crowd, her tone warm but firm. "This isn't revenge," she said. "This is correction, and correction is overdue. Because sometimes when the world tells a black woman she doesn't belong, the smartest response is to buy the building and change the locks." By the time the news broke, the headlines read like fiction. "Billionaire's wife buys dealership that disrespected her, then promotes diversity from the top." But this wasn't a story about revenge. This was a story about restoration. Chanel Matthews didn't just walk out of Pinnacle Motors with the keys to a luxury car. She walked out with the blueprints for transformation. Over the next few weeks, the dealership underwent a stunning evolution. Gone were the smug gatekeepers and shallow smiles. In their place, a leadership team that looked like the world outside, diverse, driven, and respected. Chanel didn't fire everyone. No, she educated. Mandatory bias training, transparent hiring processes, internships for underrepresented youth, partnerships with HBCUS, and a mentorship program led by women of color in automotive sales, the first of its kind in the state. The old manager retired early. The salesman who had laughed at Chanel was given a severance package and a copy of her Forbes profile. Customers began to notice. People who once felt unwelcome now walked in with pride. The dealership didn't just sell cars, it sold hope, dignity, access. Reporters tried to chase the scandal, but Chanel never gave them the drama they craved. "This isn't about going viral," she told one journalist. "It's about building something that lasts, because we've been dismissed for too long." And David, he stood beside her, never overshadowing, always supporting. At press events, he simply smiled and let Chanel lead, because he knew she was the story. A story of grace under pressure, power without shouting, legacy without apology. On the 1-month anniversary of the takeover, Chanel hosted a ribbon-cutting ceremony. She wore jeans and sneakers that day, just like the first time. She walked into the dealership, not as a customer, not even as an owner, but as a blueprint. She stood beneath the dealership's new sign, M Legacy Motors, and addressed the crowd. You don't have to change who you are to belong. You just have to own enough of the table to rearrange the seats. They laughed, they cheered, some cried. And as she cut the ribbon with calm confidence, one little black girl in the front row whispered to her mother, "That's what a boss looks like." And just like that, the woman they tried to humiliate became the name on the building. Chanel didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. Because when you're underestimated, the greatest comeback isn't loud. It's legendary. Remember her name. Remember the lesson. Power moves in silence, then signs the deed.